My name is Robert Weinstein. I work for the Brooklyn Public Library. Today is Sunday, April 28th. It is about 1:40, and I am talking to Robert Leroy Tomlin. He lives in Bayside, Queens, and he served in the Navy for 1 month in May of 1968. And we're going to be here. This was during the Vietnam War. He served in San Diego, and we're going to be just talking to him about his experiences. So, Robert, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So, start with just tell me a little bit about what your life was like growing up, about your family, brothers and sisters, or where you lived, all that stuff, like general.
I was born in South Carolina, and I was adopted at 3 months old and taken to Ohio, a place west of Cleveland called Avon Lake, and that's where I grew up. I had an older sister who was also adopted, and a younger brother that was my adoptive parents' own child. And life was rough. My adoptive mother rejected me when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and doted on my brother who was ill, and it didn't come to me until much later exactly what the problem was. He died when he was 30. He had an aortal aneurysm, and it was from a congenital condition in connection with Marfan syndrome, which he had all the signs and symptoms of, but I didn't know anything about that until pretty much after the fact. So, at any rate, since my mother threw her affections to my brother, I was just left, I was hung out to dry. Really.
Okay, and was he her natural?
Yeah, he was her natural son.
Okay.
And I was on my own. I always considered myself to be on my own. I operated as though I were on my own. I learned how to take care of myself, even though I lived in a family of 5. I did things pretty much on my own. I started earning money when I was about 12. I babysat. I got day jobs working construction, whatever I could find that I could make money at. I also worked with my father, who was a contractor, and built custom homes. Okay. So I learned a craft at the same time I was using that craft outside of the house to make money as much as I could, and pretty much paid for everything that I needed myself. I didn't really rely on my adoptive parents for
your father,
much of anything.
I'm sorry. Your father was your relationship the same with him as your mother?
Much less. My mother was the primary influence in my life up until I left home. My father wasn't really interactive with me very much. We didn't get along, and I had to work side by side with him, and so things were very strained.
Okay.
And if I did anything wrong, he would come at me. He came at me once with a 2x4, and that sort of thing. When I was about 15 or 16, I did something he didn't like. He grabbed me around the neck and started to choke me. So I brought my knee up into his crotch, and he never touched me again.
Okay.
And backed away. And my mother, much the same thing. She used to beat me with a belt if I did anything that she didn't like. And at one point, I grabbed it away from her. I guess I was about 14. I grabbed it away from her and started hitting her with it. So she stopped doing that. Mm-hmm. She found other ways, much more nefarious, much more subtle ways of punishing me.
Okay. And
it wasn't until I was about 14 or 15, maybe 16, that they started actually paying me something for the work that I was doing for them.
Okay.
Because I was expected, especially during the summer when I wasn't at school, to work 8 hours a day.
For the family business.
Hard labor for the family business.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, I learned a lot, but it came at a price.
Right.
So I was eager to leave home. And I did that as soon as I graduated from high school, so I was just 18.
Okay.
And I lived on my own for 2 years. I still had a sketchy relationship with them, but it wasn't wonderful.
Did you live in Ohio? Still?
I lived in Cleveland.
Okay.
I moved out of the house where I grew up, and I moved into a number of places, usually just rented rooms, because that's all I could afford. And I worked at several different jobs.
Okay.
And I was, at the same time I was floating at day jobs, I spent most of my evenings working in theater. I started doing that when I was between my junior and senior year in high school, because my evenings were my own. Even if I had to work with my father during the summer, my evenings were my own. So I would spend them working in a local summer theater.
Okay.
Doing stock. And then when I graduated from high school, that continued.
What kind of work were you doing? Were you on stage?
I was on stage. I was an actor, a dancer. I also worked the front of the house if I wasn't in the production that was being done at the time. Or I built sets. I made costumes. Whatever needed to be done.
Do you remember what
did it all.
Do you remember what plays you acted in?
Oh, Lord, yes. My first one was Little Abner.
Okay.
And in that show, I had a small character part, and I was also a dancer. The second show was a comedy called Enter Laughing. No, it wasn't. I forget what that play was. At any rate, was it Enter Laughing? No, it was a play I don't remember. That's very odd for me. Anyway, from that I went into Sound of Music. And I had the only non-singing role in the show, which was very interesting. But I played Franz, the butler, and did that at the end of the summer after my junior year, and then the beginning of the summer we remounted it right after I graduated.
Okay.
So, and then I did a series of shows that summer, including Enter Laughing, what else? My Fair Lady, West Side Story, a number of shows, mostly musicals I did.
Okay.
So, and I did that for 2 years.
Okay.
And then the following spring, 65, 66, I remember 60. I did that for 3 years, I think. And then I enlisted. Okay. So, but I was working during the day. After I left home, I was still working during the day and doing theater at night. Okay. So I did that up until I think the last season I worked actively in summer stock was the summer of 67. Yeah, because I did a few plays during the year with a local community theater, a couple of community theaters, as a matter of fact. And then I enlisted in January, February, I think it was February of 68 on a delayed, I think I had 120 days on a delay from enlistment to induction, which is what they were doing at the time a lot.
Okay, let's go to the period where you were working during the day and doing the theater at night. Mm-hmm. What was the experience of being on your own for the first time?
Well, aside from having about 3 hours sleep a night, I was just busy. I was always doing something, and as long as I could work during the day and make enough money to support myself, then I was busy at night. It wasn't that I didn't have a social life. My social life was in the theater. Okay. So I wasn't going to bars, and I wasn't looking for the friendship or relationships or anything like that. I didn't have the time. Okay. Mm-hmm. So and what few I had came to me through theater.
I mean, you satisfied with that?
Yeah, that was fine. Okay. Because I was doing what I enjoyed. And I was making enough money to do it. And I had a social life, or at least what I considered to be a social life as well. Okay. So. And what prompted your decision to enlist in the Navy? I was concerned because right after high school, I went into... I enrolled in a community college. Lorraine County Community College, and I did that for a semester. Hated that. Dropped out, and then enrolled in Cleveland State. It was its first or second year, maybe third, in existence. So they were using, it was a university of satellites. They were using local high schools for their classes after hours. And I took a full load one semester at Cleveland State. And that wasn't any better than the community college. So I came to understand that the problem wasn't the institution, the problem was me. I wasn't ready to do it. I wasn't focused on it. It didn't mean anything to me at the time, so I just said, okay, that's it. So that was at the end of spring term 67 that I just said, okay, I'm walking away from school for the moment, and we'll see what happens. So I wasn't enrolled in college. And that was 67, so I worked summer theater that season. And then in the fall, I was dancing. I was taking ballet lessons at the time at the Ballet Russe of Cleveland. And that was very exciting because I managed to meet Rudolph Nureyev and Margot Fontaine. They were in town with the Royal Ballet, and we were sponsoring them locally. So I met several members of the Royal Ballet, and that was incredible. So, and even had Rudolph Nureyev for a master's class with the Ballet Russe, and that was really exciting.
Can you talk about that for a second? Just the experience of it?
Yeah, well, at the time, he had, since he had joined the ballet, I mean, prior to that, he had made a tour of the United States undercover as a Frenchman because he was seeking asylum. And once he was granted asylum, then he started working as a star, a guest star, in several places. One of which was the Royal Ballet of London.
Okay.
And or in London, and I was taking lessons, and it was that they scheduled this tour, or they had Cleveland on the schedule for the tour, and it was just really exciting to be part of something bigger than I'd ever been before, or ever been connected with before, and hosting them was a real treat. We were able to talk to them. He was a bastard, but that was beside the point. And he was annoying the hell out of Margot Fontaine, and she was absolutely regal about the whole thing. She tolerated him. She controlled him. He was just being a little bad boy. And there were a couple of other dancers, Anthony Dowell, one of them, who was absolutely stellar. He was a premier dancer with the Royal Ballet at the time. And just talking to them, being able to interact with them on any level was a very exciting thing. I held on to that for a long time afterward. Things like that would keep me going wherever and whenever I could tap into them, which wasn't often. On occasion, somebody would come through the Cleveland Playhouse, and I had contacts there. And Cleveland Playhouse was a regional theater, so they were equity, and they would get guest stars, and that was very exciting. Or I'd go to the local house that's on the touring circuit for Broadway, and I would insinuate myself with those people, and met people like Ray Walston and Marion Marlowe, and people you probably never heard of.
No.
But at the time, they were Ray Walston had a TV show at or around the time called My Favorite Martian with Bill Bixby, who became the Incredible Hulk. So I had all these connections, and of course, now I talk about these people, and it makes me realize that I'm 65 years old. Nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about. So, but it was cool at the time, and also the Metropolitan Opera came through. touring with, among other things, De Fledermaus, which is a Strauss opera, more like an operetta than an opera. And it starred Jack Guilford, an old character actor, but one of my favorite actors, and Kitty Carlisle Hart. Now, Kitty Carlisle started with the Marx Brothers in the 30s.
Yes.
Okay, Night at the Opera. Okay, she married Moss Hart. Moss Hart wrote "You Can't Take It With You" and directed Camelot, and a fixture in the theater. In fact, they're just this spring they're doing his autobiography as a play, Act One, at Vivian Beaumont. Okay. So I'm going to see that in June. But I've read that like 5 times. Couldn't get enough of it. So I was with a teacher, one of my teachers at the time, who would take me places. And it's how I tapped into a lot of culture, because my parents were not at all cultured people. They were farmers. And then construction, so very blue collar or lower. So they had no way of showing me anything except what was on television. Right. And so this English teacher I had, we hooked up as friends more than anything else, and he took me all over the place to see things that I would never have seen otherwise. And it was amazing. Just what he exposed me to. And one of the things was this opera, Fledermaus. And afterwards, we went to a local restaurant near where the opera was where they were performing. And in walks Jack Guilford. And so I said I had to meet him. So I met him and chatted with him for a few minutes, and that was wonderful. It wasn't until many years later that I met Kitty Carlisle. And at that point, she was into her 90s, well into her 90s, and charming and delightful. And all I could talk about was her husband, because of the impression he had made on me and how I regretted never meeting him. And she was charmed. She loved that, because everybody else talks about her to her.
Oh, right. Okay.
And she was very, very flattered on behalf of her husband.
Oh, that's terrific.
So that was nice. That was wonderful. So even though I've long since left theater, I still find people. It's sort of nice. I worked for CBS News for 13 years. Oh, okay. And met a lot of people that way, because I was working in the broadcast center on 57th Street, and people were in and out of the building a lot because of what we produced. They would come in as guest stars. Right. We did. When I started, we were doing, I think, 2 soaps in the building, and then we went down to 1 soap. So I knew all the soap actors, and at one point I was doing lights for the soaps. Oh, okay. Yeah, big. During a strike, I was a scab. Right. It was great money. Great money. I couldn't pass it up.
I would imagine. So, yeah.
At any rate, I digress. But theater was huge in my life. Okay. And I finally, when I did leave Cleveland, I left to go to school outside of Philadelphia at Hedgerow Theater. But it was in '68 when I enlisted in, I think, February. And I did so because I was not registered in college. And they were coming after us. They were looking for those people who were not registered in college.
You said earlier there was no draft at that point?
There was a draft.
Oh, there was a draft.
There was a draft. Okay. Oh, definitely.
Okay.
And that's when they were coming after us. From the time I was 18, I had to have a draft card. Okay. Okay. It was mandatory like it is now. For a while between then and now, there was no draft. Mm-hmm. And selective service had been dissolved. And then they reestablished it for, I think, the first Gulf War, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But at the time, they were pulling people. They were starting with those people that would be affected the least by being drafted.
When you say affected the least,
in terms of personal, in terms of personal lives.
Okay. Like not large families, not
Right.
married,
Right.
okay,
Not necessarily working at a career job,
okay,
that sort of thing.
uh-huh.
And even some of the career jobs they were pulling, if they were young enough,
Mm-hmm.
because they were looking for 18, 19, 20-year-olds.
Got it. Okay. And did you have an idea of what the war entailed at that point?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. We were very involved in protesting the war.
Okay.
The March on Washington. I did I think 2 marches on
Mm-hmm.
Washington. The second of which was after this.
Okay.
At any rate, I was aware, very much aware of what was going on. I was most of my friends growing up, especially when I got in my teen years, were about 10 years older than I was.
Oh.
And I was running around locally with people who were involved in protest. They were involved in folk music, which was all part of protest. We were looking at such people as the Weavers and Pete Seeger and Joan Baez, and all of that group of people were very much our icons. And we were involved on a local level, protesting where and when we could.
Okay.
We didn't. The first March on Washington I did, I can't remember when it was. It was about that time, 67, or I can't remember, but it was about that time.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think it was 67, because
Uh-huh.
I remember walking with a candle across the bridge to Arlington, to the cemetery.
Okay.
The second one was during the Nixon administration,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when we all got tear gassed. But so I remember getting to Washington about 1 o'clock in the morning. I drove, and I parked about 2 blocks from the White House and slept in my car. Try to do that today.
Right.
Isn't going to happen at all. So that was sort of cool. But I was signed up as a marshal because they were having trouble. They were concerned, particularly about the weathermen, and they were tipped off that the weathermen were going to try and start some trouble. They were going
At the march on.
They were right. They were
Okay.
going to accelerate the activity into something that was less than peaceful.
Okay.
And so they got a lot of us to become marshals. We did a quick train, like an hour or 2, and then they put us out there. We knew sort of what to look for,
Okay.
just to keep things as calm and peaceful, and break things up, isolate the troublemakers if we could. So that was sort of cool.
Uh-huh.
But I was involved on that level in terms of the war.
Okay.
I knew that if I had gotten involved in the ground war, I'd come home in a box.
Okay. Why did you know that? Or what made you think that?
Because we were watching it on the news on a nightly basis. I couldn't believe it. I was watching Dan Rather in the trenches. It was obscene.
Uh-huh.
The fact that and then I ended up working for the company. But it was really an awful thing to watch. And we would watch it while we were eating dinner.
Right.
Because that's when the news was on. And everybody wanted to know. And fortunately, since then, they stopped that practice.
Right.
They don't do that anymore.
When you say you were watching Dan Rather in the trenches, were you actually watching?
It wasn't a live feed.
Okay.
It was all. It was. They were shipping tape with or film. I think they were using film at that point. Mm-hmm. Through most of the Vietnam War, it was film. They didn't do tape until much later. They had tape in house, but not on location. But everything was filmed. They were shipping it home by messenger somehow. And as soon as they got it and developed it and edited it, they threw it on the news. They really didn't take much time to edit things. We weren't watching people being blown apart, but at the same token, or by the same token, they you could hear the gunfire, you saw an occasional body, so you knew, the things were not wonderful there.
Okay.
And that kind of footage I didn't see ever after that on air. But I saw it once I started working, because I was working in archives. And we were getting feeds from all over the world. A plane crash, and you had body parts hanging from trees. That was lovely. And minor skirmishes, we would see whatever they filmed or whatever they taped before it got edited and aired. And so I saw a lot of raw footage of things I don't really ever want to see again.
Okay.
But at the time, they were showing too much, just a little too much. I think what tipped the scale in favor of the public was when the Marines came ashore during, it wasn't Tanzania, there was Black Hawk Down that was in...
Rwanda. No, it was...
on the East Coast.
Yes.
Because the Marines came ashore.
Yeah.
And that's where all the pirates come from. At any rate, from that country. And they mounted an assault at night, and they were preceded ashore by the press with cameras. And they filmed it all, or taped it all, and then aired it. And that's when the Army said, or the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, that's it. No more press. You'll get what we get. So the first conflict in Iraq, they were very careful about what they gave to the press. And sometimes we waited days. Usually it was hours before they would tell us things. But and I know that because that's when I was working at CBS, and I was a line producer during the war. So the first conflict, and I was begging information from wherever I could get it. But that's another story. So that's what made it, and it was all very real to us because it was real. It wasn't something, we weren't watching a reenactment. We weren't watching anything romanticized, like a movie about the war. It was the war.
Right. And was there any consideration of registering as a conscientious objector? Was that an option that was available?
That brought on a whole world of trouble. Okay.
How so?
From peers, from the community, from government. The first thing they said was, "We don't believe you."
Okay.
And I don't think I conscientiously objected to what was going on. I just didn't want to be a part of it. I guess my only real objection to it was, who the hell do these people think they are, and why do they think they can put my life at stake for something stupid?
And by they you mean the government?
The government.
Okay.
Any government. I find it a monumental arrogance.
Yeah.
And there's the government, and the only other entity, theoretically, that is capable of doing such a thing without impunity, or with impunity, is God.
Okay.
So there you have it. God and government, hand in hand. Right? Bullshit.
Okay.
Utter bullshit. So I'm in that respect, I'm anti-government. Of course, what's going on now is a whole new layer of anti-government because the people are stupid. They're just stupid.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Did you have anything more to
No, that's pretty much it. Just that I was aware. I mean, I didn't go into the Navy because I was watching old World War II movies, and it looked very glamorous to me. Fred Astaire doing a tap dance on board a ship,
right.
a battleship, is not my idea of a good time, no matter what's going on.
Uh-huh.
But that would not have enticed me to join a branch of the military. I joined the Navy, and I chose the Navy. Granted, it was, if I had enlisted, I would have been in for 2 years. Or if I had been drafted, I would have been in the Army for 2 years. If I enlisted in the Army, I'd be there for 3 years. If I enlisted in the Navy, it was 4 years. That was okay, because I would have found something to learn and something to do, and perhaps come out of the service with a whole new skill set. That was fine. However, there was one big overriding reason I would not look at the Army. Because when they were inducting people, they were taking every fourth or fifth inductee in the Army and sending them to Camp Lejeune, to Paris Island,
okay,
to be a Marine. That's the last thing in the world I wanted.
right.
So I thought a better choice was the Navy. Actually, I was thinking the Air Force, but that was, even then, was like getting into a fraternity. It was sort of a joke in the military. It's still, in fact, it's even more so now.
Okay.
Because it's, and a lot of gay people ended up in either the Navy or the Air Force.
Okay.
And I found out that the Navy has a bigger Air Force than the Air Force.
Oh, okay.
So I thought my chances were better in the Navy if I wanted to fly. And I couldn't fly because I wore glasses since I was 13.
Okay.
So they were not going to do that. But I looked at meteorology, I looked at navigation, all of those things, because I'm an avid map reader, and all of that appealed to me. So I had things I wanted to shoot for, options.
Okay.
And during the course of the R&O, once I did enlist and was actually inducted and taken to San Diego, they tested us. There's a test that you take we used to take it in junior high school, called the Cooter Preference Test. And that gave an indication of what you might be most interested in.
I took that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And mine was clerical work. And I've always been good at that. I'm very efficient. I'm very organized. I have no problem doing clerical work, but it's boring as hell.
Yeah.
So I knew I was good at it. And if I could parlay that into something, more interesting, I'd have to get a little science for the meteorology. And I really didn't have any formal cartography background for maps and navigation, but I would certainly be willing to learn. Anyway,
Okay.
There were options, and there was always special, what's it called? Special forces, special something, where they put people, musicians and such, for the Armed Forces bands that exist.
Right. Okay.
The special something or other.
Mm-hmm.
Special services, that's it.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that's a possibility as well. I played the trumpet, I could sing and dance, I had skills.
Okay.
So there were possibilities and certainly opportunities for them. So I enlisted in the Navy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So knowing how you felt about the war itself,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing the opportunities that you, like having done the due diligence of figuring out which was the best for you, what take us through the first. Well, you arrived.
Okay.
You arrived.
It starts before I left.
Okay. All right.
I went to the induction center. They did a real quick physical because they hadn't done that before. So it was like at that point they put you through the induction process. You don't do anything prior to that except sign the papers. I got to the induction center.
Let's take some more.
Oh yeah, thanks. I got to the induction center, And we got sworn in. We filled out papers. And, of course, I lied on the papers. I said I wasn't gay. And I resented having to do that. But, hey, I'm there, and what are they going to do to me? I could have walked away from it right then and there, but I had nothing to walk to.
Right.
I had taken the last 4 months, the 4 months that they gave me before I was inducted, clearing up everything, getting all of my stuff. It's like the opportunity to get everything in order before you don't. So, and I pretty much equated it with that. But I had nothing. I had no job. I was just out there. I probably could have found something if I wanted to, but I wanted to investigate this to see where it would take me. It didn't seem so bad at the time.
Okay.
And it wasn't bad. It just, I got real tired real quick of people barking orders at me.
Okay.
Like quicker than I probably should have. Because I'd been out on my own for 2 years. And you don't tell me what to do. You just don't tell me what to do. Because there's a whole number in my head. So that was a bit of a problem at induction. But they swore us in. And then they gave us our orders. And I had been told for 4 months that I was going to Great Lakes to boot camp. And on the orders they cut for me, it said San Diego. So I had them hold everything up. They had to unseal the orders and double check that I was in fact going to San Diego and not to Great Lakes, because if I ended up in San Diego and I was supposed to be in Great Lakes, I'd be AWOL.
Right.
So right away,
Exactly.
Right away, I started causing problems. So, and it continued. So I got to San Diego. We flew from Cleveland to Dallas to San Diego and went through one hellish storm between Dallas and San Diego that would have made me turn back at that point. But landed in San Diego. We were all dog-tired because we'd been up all day and we'd been going through all this crap. And they took us to the airport and got us on a plane. And they treated us very nicely because once they found out we were inductees, that's when airlines actually, were gracious.
Okay.
And so we did not go hungry, and we did, we were good. Excuse me. We got to San Diego. Got to the base, and we're given rack assignments, and we slept as best we could in strange places without noises, and it wasn't comfortable. And I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to be comfortable for the next 4 years. It's just not going to happen. And I was okay with that. The next morning, we were up at 4, and then they started putting us through our registration period. And we got uniforms, got work clothes. They didn't give us the uniform set. We got work clothes, we got our hair cut, and then we started with these little mini lectures. We would march quick time from one building to another, and we'd see yet another chief petty officer or some other ranking officer, and they would give us these little talks about sex mostly, and sexuality. And one of them that I distinctly remember because it prompted me to say something to my CO was that if we were caught doing anything with another guy, we'd be thrown into the brig and we'd be court-martialed because it was illegal. I thought, just because it's illegal? What is your problem? And of course it went deeper than that, and I wasn't about to deal with any of that at the time. So I think it was our third day.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
When you said it was illegal, it's illegal in the Navy, or illegal?
It was illegal, as far as they were concerned, it was illegal on the planet.
Okay. But in actuality, it was just illegal in the Navy.
Yes.
Like, it was a court-martialable
It was,
offense.
exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, they told us all these horror stories about being locked up in the brig at Camp Pendleton, which was where the Navy locked up its people, because it was right next door. And they had the police staff to operate the brig. They didn't have that on base in San Diego for the Navy, on the naval base. So everything went to Camp Pendleton. And they're Marines. So, and just lots of horror stories, things to make you afraid. They loved that. They wanted to make you afraid, then they wanted to demoralize you and break you down. Hence all of the shouting of orders at you and making you do things that you had no intention of ever doing on your own. And just, breaking you down and breaking you down and breaking you down until you had nothing left. There was nothing left of you, and then they could build you up as a serviceman.
Okay.
And they did that in all of the branches of the service,
Mm-hmm.
which it's understandable from the management point of view, because they have to know that you're going to follow an order when you're given it, that you are going to protect not only your back, but the back of the person next to you, so on. And I understand that. I didn't like it, but I understood it. I was not about to be taken down. So when I realized all of this was about to happen, I said, I don't want to be here. And as much as what they told me about sexuality was disturbing and frightening, it was also a way out. So I went to my CO and I said, okay, sure.
Before we go there,
Okay.
What were they telling you about homosexuality, or about
That it was bad, it was wrong, it was immoral.
and you said they were trying to frighten you as well?
Yes,
with it?
by telling me it was a punishable offense.
Okay.
And no questions asked, I'd be locked up.
Okay.
And more than likely dragged through a court-martial.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Got it. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I'd never been in trouble in my life. I had ample opportunity to be in trouble, but I was never in trouble. Never hung with the wrong people. I never did anything illegal. It wasn't part of my nature.
Okay.
So, if all of a sudden part of my nature is illegal, because I never looked at it that way. I knew I was gay when I was 12.
Okay.
And I never saw anything wrong with that. I stayed in the closet all through high school because it was my choice and I didn't want to deal with it with respect to my classmates, people around me, my relatives, any of that.
Right.
I knew that when I was 18, I was on my own and I could live my life the way I wanted to. So I'd been doing that for 2 years before I went into service.
Right.
Try to backpedal from that is impossible.
Yeah.
It's just nobody. That's why I said nobody's going to tell me what to do.
Okay. And was there a physical force aspect of this too? Like, were they physically intimidating about it? Like,
They weren't threatening physically.
Okay.
At all. But they were letting you know in no uncertain terms, this is what was going to happen to you. Period.
Mm-hmm.
There was no wiggle room here. There was no negotiation, no mitigating circumstances, nothing.
Okay.
This is the way it was.
Right.
And in the process of doing this, we were still doing the orientation phase of this was part of the orientation phase of RNO before you actually officially started boot camp, because it was about 4 days or 5 days into your time in boot camp before you officially started boot camp.
Got it. Okay.
And we were given weapons. They didn't work, but to carry them and drill with them. And they'd get us up at 4:30 every morning. We had an adjutant, and that's exactly what he was. More like an irritant.
Mm-hmm.
And he would kick a garbage can from one end of the barracks to the other to wake us up. I got up. The first morning he did it, put on my boondockers, my boots, and kicked it all the way back to the other end. And I said, "Don't you ever do that again." And I was this far from being pulled out and sent somewhere to be punished.
Right.
But because it was like the first morning or first day, they just let it slide. And they really gave me a hard time after that.
Okay.
They just got right up into my face. And I looked at them like they were crazy, because I thought they were.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't quite know how to approach me. And they knew that I could very easily be trouble to them.
Right.
So they were working on how to deal with this. Now all of the lectures we had as a group. We were a company of maybe 30 people from all over the country, very varying backgrounds.
Huh.
We had everything from shit kickers off farms to Filipinos, right from Manila, because at the time they were a protectorate and they could join the military in the United States.
Nice. Okay.
Because we hadn't given them their independence yet, so they were there. It varied, and it's when they find out what they're working with.
Okay.
So I was happy to let them know what they were working with, and they really bore down on me. They kept me on a really tight leash.
Okay.
And that didn't give me, what I resented was I had no me time. I had no time to myself, and I wasn't going to get any time to myself for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have worn me down faster than anything else. So when the opportunity arose, which at the end of this sexuality talk, they said, if anyone has a problem with this, let your CO know. So I immediately went to my CO.
And this is when you realized that you didn't want to be a part of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Because at that point, 3-4 days on, I was ready to leave. I had had it.
Right.
So I went to my CO, and I said, "I'm gay." And he looked at me and said, "Are you sure?" And I started to giggle. Why would I say I'm gay if I'm not gay? So, and he said, because that means I have a lot of paperwork to do, and I don't like paperwork. I said, bite the bullet, because I'm out of here. I'm not going to put myself in a position where I'm going to be punished for something that I do not find unnatural or aberrant or anything else negative. There's nothing wrong with me, psychologically or physically or mentally. I'm just oriented differently. And it was at a time when that wasn't
the common.
It wasn't part of the parlance. Nobody knew what all those things meant. But I had been around other gay people, and we were sort of, I guess in certain ways I was somewhat of an activist, but we had to keep it all on the quiet because you just couldn't do that. There were so many laws against it, and no matter where you went, that you just not could be open about it.
Right.
So it was difficult. There were places like New York that were okay. In fact, New York was probably, or San Francisco were probably the only two places on the planet where you could be okay. Not out, but okay, if you kept it quiet. Everywhere else, you were a target. And so it was dicey.
Mm.
I just, I had, so in some respects it was all new to me. And I had a lot of fears about it because I did not want to put myself in a position where I was going to be attacked physically. I could handle being attacked mentally and emotionally and verbally, but I couldn't handle being attacked physically. Uh-huh. And I thought that was just, there was no reason for that. So I told my CO that I was gay. And they moved me almost immediately. God forbid it should rub off on somebody else, right? Uh-huh. They moved me immediately to a holding company where there were all kinds of, there were people there for all kinds of reasons. Some of them were there because they were druggies, uh-huh. and they were caught with them on base, and that to me was just like stupid. But there were some there that were behaviorals, that they just, no matter what was done to them, they couldn't fit in. Uh-huh. And I think that at the time I was sent there, I had been there the least amount of time. I'd been on base the least amount of time because it'd been like 3 or 4 days. So people were curious about all sorts of things. And I was very happy to be open about it and tell them. But I had to be put in this holding company because they had to process me out, mm-hmm. Which meant that paperwork had to be created and sent to Washington and then back to San Diego. Uh-huh. And there were no things like fax machines then that were viable. So it was all done, physically.
Okay.
So I had to wait. And part of the process was being interviewed by a psychiatrist and a social worker. Well, the psychiatrist, I don't think he had much of an understanding about what homosexuality was.
Okay.
Because he asked some really strange questions that I don't remember. Uh-huh. And finally he just signed off. But they wanted to know how I knew I was gay. Uh-huh. So I told them. I told them about who I'd slept with, when it started, all of that stuff, the very, very detailed personal history. And because I remembered, I remember when I was 6 and diddling the little girl across the street. And then I was 12 and I was diddling her little brother.
Okay.
So, so it was, and that's pretty much where I made up my mind. I liked chocolate instead of vanilla. And
was there did they want to know why you put on your paperwork at the beginning that you weren't gay?
Why?
Was there a concern about that?
There was. They wanted to know not so much why I put it there, mm-hmm. but they wanted to know
you can keep
if I knew what it meant to put it there. The mm-hmm. fact that I had lied.
Got it. Okay.
That's what concerned them.
Right.
And if they did ask me why I put it there, I would have told them that I put it there because I wanted to be in the Navy, I thought. Uh-huh. Which got into a whole discussion about, what do you think now, and why have you changed your mind? Uh-huh. And they wanted to make sure that the change of mind wasn't because I saw an easy out and I wanted to take it. They mm-hmm. wanted to know that I did have a history of being gay, and that I was not the kind of material they wanted at that time in the service.
Okay.
Yeah, and the big thing was to get me out. The only thing to get me out was the technicality, and mm-hmm. it was just that. It wasn't anything more than a technicality. I lied on one question of my induction papers.
Okay.
And then signed my name to it. So I thought, okay, well, this is cool. I can handle this. Of course, then they sent me to the social worker. This woman had to be in her late 70s. She was not active duty. She was a civilian. And she had one of the foulest minds I'd ever come across. She asked me what I did with men. And I would say, well, I would perform fellatio. Oh, you mean sucking them off? Said, and anal intercourse. Oh, you mean like cornholing? She'd come back at me with all of these terms that I knew, but I didn't use them because I thought they were really disgusting and base and beneath me. So I'd always had a very good vocabulary. And I used it liberally. And I was trying to be as forthright with her as possible. And I just couldn't believe what she kept coming back at me with. And wanting to know in detail what my encounters were like. I said, lady, you don't need to know any of this. Maybe you think you do, but you don't. And that's as far as it's going. And I got up and walked out.
Did you get a sense she was trying to get, she was trying to provoke you, or?
Probably.
Okay.
Probably. I didn't see it as a provocation. Because of her approach to it, I just thought she was trying to get off on it. Because of how she approached it. I thought, this is really sick.
Right.
So I didn't want anything to do with it. I saw her once. And she signed off on the papers. I saw the psychiatrist twice. The first time was for an interview, and the second time was for me to sign papers along with him. And I remember going between the holding company where I was and I think it was the psychiatrist's office. I was on my way back to the holding company, and it was early in the morning, and I got stopped by an officer on the road, and he started to dress me down because I hadn't shaved. So, you don't know the half of it, sir. And he threatened to put me on report. I said, knock yourself out. What good is it going to do either of us to put me on report? You know, it's not going to mean anything. So I just wanted to be rid of it at that point because it was annoying. It was really, really. I saw no value in what they were doing.
Right.
I just couldn't understand how that made me a better human being.
Right.
And as far as I know, it didn't. Because what they were looking for was what I used to call good old boys. The ones that slap each other's asses in the showers and talk about women's anatomy in really gross terms and their exploits. And I don't listen to that now. Why would I be interested in that? You know, I've never been interested in that.
Right.
It was not the kind of person I wanted to be. You know, if you let me be the kind of person I want to be, I'll be more than happy to do what you want me to.
Okay.
But that wasn't the case. So
I'm just going to pause for
That's
a
okay.
second.
Sure.
I'm just realizing that.
Okay.
All right, so we're back. Good. So
one of the things that the psychiatrist, a parting shot, insisted on doing, because my mother didn't know I was gay. My father didn't know I was gay. I never shared that with them. And they wouldn't have known because I spent my time to myself whenever I could. I really didn't involve them in my life. You know, as much as they involved me in their lives, I would not involve them in my life. So one of the things the psychiatrist insisted upon is my telling my mother that I was coming home and why. So I did. And her reaction was, don't tell your father, it'll kill him. I I have since come to find out that she was a closeted lesbian.
Oh, okay.
And that made all the sense in the world then. But, at the time, I thought, what a strange reaction. So,
okay.
it was very interesting. And I waited in this holding company for 3 weeks until all got processed, and they put me on a plane back to Cleveland.
Okay, and you said that it was an honorable discharge?
It's a general discharge under honorable conditions. They have 4 different kinds, or had at the time 4 different kinds of discharge: honorable discharge, general under honorable conditions, general under dishonorable conditions, and dishonorable discharge.
Okay.
And I could have fallen in it, but because it was a technicality,
Right.
they gave me the general under honorable.
Okay. And were you you're obviously pardon me, happy to leave?
I was ecstatic.
Okay.
But when I got home, the reactions were varied. And of course I had to lie about why I came home because I didn't want anybody to know any of that. And I had a couple of medical issues that could easily have been used
As excuses.
as excuses, right? So that was fine.
Okay.
That wasn't a problem. And I just, from that point on, any time I was asked about service, I just said I hadn't served.
Okay. And when you first told someone this story, tell me about that.
Actually, it was right after I got home.
Okay.
Because I did have a set of friends that we hung together, and they thought it was hysterical. They loved it. I thought, okay, well, this is my pain. This is, they just thought it was a hoot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Life went on.
Okay.
Pretty much as it had. And I got home the end of May, beginning of June. I started right in with summer theater. I had 68. That was a very interesting year. I had the previous summer. I had hooked up the summer theater where I worked. I had gotten involved with an acting troupe that had come in and taken over the summer theater for the summer. There were a group of people from Carnegie Mellon University. They were all in their dramatic department. And I got to be very good friends with them. And there were people like, the people that wrote Godspell.
Oh, okay.
John Michael Teblank
Yeah.
and Stephen Schwartz. I became friends with them. And several people in the company a few who have gone on to do other things in the business, and most of whom haven't. And I was involved peripherally in the production in New York, but at the Promenade on the Upper West Side. And I just, so I hung tight with this group of people. All of us went to Woodstock together. And that was an experience. Mm-hmm. So I've been able to tap into several things that I find important parts of my life, or I think of them as important parts of my life, because of these people.
Okay.
That was in 67 and 68. That all changed with the summer theater where I worked, and I lost interest greatly and didn't really do much. The following year, I sort of was at loose ends, and I was doing productions at other places in the community. Mm-hmm. And I got on the board of a community theater, and I hated that because I thought I was too young to do that, and made my decision to leave Cleveland and go to acting school in Philadelphia. So that got me out of the area. But things were a bit. They weren't tumultuous, but they were. There was a lot of unsettling time, a lot of times that I didn't really know what to do with. I was changing. The people in my life were changing, and I had a death in the family just before I left, and that hastened me to leave.
Okay.
And I went and picked up a friend. This was in May of 1970, early May of 1970. I picked up a friend at Kent State, and he was getting involved in the protests that were going on. And I said, "You got to get out of here. You got to leave." So I took him. We went hiking on the Appalachian Trail on the Tennessee-North Carolina border, and ended up in the town where I was born, in York, South Carolina, because I was interested in doing some research on my background. And it was, we slept overnight in the car when we got there, and a policeman was tapping on my window to wake me up. And they hauled us into the local precinct and started asking questions, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. We hadn't done anything really wrong. They said, "Well, you're not supposed to sleep." Well, we didn't know that. But there was no, it wasn't a punishable offense, so I thought we'd just get sent on our way. But they were concerned, and they had us call our home because that the afternoon before was when the shootings occurred at Kent State. So, and I had Ohio license plates on the car. So they, first the car wasn't there, and then the car was there. So they were curious, questioning. They wanted to know we weren't in some way involved. They wanted us to let our parents know we were all right. We weren't involved with any of that. So it made sense. But everywhere I went, I wouldn't get in trouble. I would most of the time be peripherally involved somehow, but involved, or at least in my mind, involved. So it was all very curious.
I think I've only got like a couple more questions. One has to do before you were discharged, and how were you treated inside the holding cell by the other? Well, not the holding cell, but the holding barracks.
The holding company, yes.
Holding company, yeah.
That was interesting. First of all, the food was military, but plentiful. I have to admit that, plentiful. And our duties were light but disgusting, because we cleaned toilets and polished brass and all of that, busy work, because they wanted us to do something, not just sit there. But we had a lot of free time, and we'd sit around and talk about music, especially contemporary music, rock. They were all into rock. We were all of the same generation. We were all, familiar with the same things. And they started calling me the professor because of the way I explained things to them. And all they had to do was ask, and I'd explain anything to them, as long as I knew what they wanted to know, and I had some knowledge of it. And I had, at that point, a wealth of knowledge. So I actually paid attention growing up and focused, which I don't see in my students now. But that made me feel a little special, because I wasn't feeling wonderful. And I was treated well. I was treated by the other people that I was in the barracks with. And I was treated well by the people overseeing, the officers overseeing the barracks. We didn't really have... It was great. I could not go off base because I had no uniform. All I had was my work clothes, my dungarees. And so the guys that had their uniforms could get shore leave on occasion. Even though they were in a holding company, they were allowed to leave base, and they'd go across to Tijuana and get drugs. and bring them back to me, which was wonderful.
Good way to pass the time.
Yes, definitely. Which only enhanced our discussions about music and other things. And that was fine. That was, so it wasn't a horrible place. I could go to the company store with what little money I had, and they were still paying me, which I found interesting. And we get a little money every week. And I could go and I could buy things that caught my interest. I was putting models together, and nothing grand or great, but just stuff to occupy my time and my mind. And I read a lot.
Okay.
I read an awful lot, and that helped tremendously.
Actually, I now have two more questions.
Okay.
So did you meet anyone, or did you know anyone who you went in with, who served and came back? Or
I didn't go in with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I knew people who had served and came back, but they weren't in my age group. They were older.
Okay, and from their experiences, did you feel as though what you thought about going over there and you coming back in a box was a correct assumption?
It was a distinct possibility.
Okay.
I don't think I thought of it as anything other than that. I wasn't convinced that that's what was going to happen, but I was convinced that it was a distinct possibility.
Okay.
And my being in the Navy would probably lower that possibility to a minimum.
Right. Okay.
So, and that was all before I decided that's not where I wanted to be either. So,
right.
So it became a non-issue. Now, I found it interesting that the year they started the lottery, I would have been taken immediately. My number was 13.
Okay.
So, and at that point, it was moot.
Right.
So, but it was very interesting to watch all of that unfold. Mm-hmm. First being, it being a possibility that I would be there and in some capacity, there. And then it became sort of an abstraction because I knew I wasn't ever going to have to deal with that directly again.
Right.
And I just felt badly for them. And when a friend of mine was brought home in a box, that really that upset so many people. It was like I couldn't believe how devastating it was to so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Even people who were not all that close to him. It's like, what a hell of a way to die.
Yeah.
And for what purpose?
Mm-hmm. And
then we lost the war. I mean, the official word is we lost the war. Mm. Why were we there? Why did it happen in the first place? Mm. And there were all kinds of stories. The CIA and their poppy fields, the quality of marijuana being shipped out of the area because they were growing it and using it as currency throughout the rest of the world. I don't know how true that was,
right?
But it was knowledge that was just a little beyond rumor.
Right.
Too many people on too many levels were talking about it, and none of them may have known exactly what it was they were talking about. However, I found it very curious that so many people were talking about it, almost as if it were common knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
And that was really disturbing. If that's why we were over, we have an imperialist nature. No matter what the official line is out of Washington, we have always had an imperialist nature, and it goes back to Manifest Destiny. And when the Europeans first came to this country, and started pushing the Native Americans back. It may be yours, but now it's ours.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because we say it's ours. We claim it. And I have never liked that. I'm glad some of it's been rectified, but not nearly enough of it.
Okay.
It's been rectified. And I have Native America in my background, a few generations back, Cherokee, and what the military, what the country did to the Cherokee Nation was an abomination, an absolute abomination. So I will always have issues, always have issues.
Okay. The last. So you're a teacher now.
I'm an English teacher.
An English teacher.
Part-time.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what? Earlier in the interview, you made a distinction between a subtle distinction between the government that runs the military and the job that the military does, which is like so how can you talk about that distinction? I mean, is that correct? First, like, I mean, did I hear that correctly?
As though it were two different.
Yeah.
Issues.
I mean, it sounded like that's what you said, or that's what you were, or that. Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing I have friends who were lifers in the military. I have family who served in the military. My father was stationed at Fort Bragg when he met my mother and produced me. Now, these are my birth parents.
Yeah.
So I didn't find my mother, but I found her family. She died before I could find her. So I have, and my stepfather was a lifer in the Air Force.
Okay.
He was a captain when he finally retired, and he was working for Nixon, which didn't please me at all. But that's okay. He did his job. But my father was stationed at Fort Bragg and was part of the 82nd Airborne and was injured jumping out of an airplane. So he never saw active duty. He spent most of his time in hospital at Hot Springs, Arkansas, having his knee rehabilitated.
Okay.
So that was sort of a bust. And then he separated after his 3 years and went about his life. But it took me 50 years to find him, but I found him. And he had stories about the military, which were not wonderful. His experience at Hot Springs was one of, we will give you this or do this for you if you allow us to do that to you. So he became a lab rat.
Right.
And I don't know if it eventually caught up with him and was the reason for the ailments that he suffered and eventually killed him, or that's a separate issue. But he was experimented on, and willingly, because they had promised him this or that or something.
And did they come through on those?
Pretty much.
Okay.
And the one thing that was most important to him, and I can understand it completely, is that he was totally taken care of medically all the rest of his life.
Okay.
By Veterans Administration. And by him, they could do no wrong. And he had a wonderful facility. He lived his life in Tucson. And the VA hospital there is one of the best in the country. It's just phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
So it worked out for him, and that's fine. I just, I hear about the Tuskegee people and what they went through and how the government just didn't really think of them as human beings, actually. And I find that kind of military, that part of the military, that part of government, really disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way they lie, of course. We're torturing them, we're not torturing them, and so on, and they can't seem to get past certain things that they say they're going to get past, and clean up like Guantanamo, I have a problem with. I'll always have a problem with the government. And a friend of mine who retired out of the Navy and was an Annapolis graduate thinks the military can do no wrong. Mm-hmm. Now, so we have these discussions. He's also become oh God, now the term's gone right out of my head. The conservative Republican group that is Tea Baggers. Tea Party. He's become a member of the Tea Party, and that really I found quite a surprise, because I thought he was a little more discerning than that.
Right.
Yeah, but those are his politics.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to stay away from it whenever we possibly can. Because my take is that most of the people in power in this government are bigots and anti-Semites. Mm-hmm. And he's convinced that the Tea Party is not a bunch of bigots. Mm-hmm. You're kidding. How much more racist do you need to be before you consider them racist?
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's not something that they keep secret.
Yeah.
They're sexist, they're racist, they're anti-Semitic. It's like the Ku Klux Klan without sheets. Mm. But that's my perspective, and it may not be there completely. It may not be right. It may not be, but it's how I perceive what I see, okay. And I do know the difference between what I see and what I perceive. Mm-hmm. So I'm open to changing my mind based on the information that comes at me. Mm-hmm. So, and for all of the 65 years I found that a rarity.
Okay.
Especially as people age. They become more conservative, mm-hmm. less malleable. Yeah. But I'll change my mind if you come up with a reasonable explanation, whatever information you have. And I've changed my mind many times based on what I know. And I'm finding out that the more I know, the less I know to be true. Uh-huh. So hey,
yeah,
I'm at toward the end of things. I'm not there yet, mm-hmm. But it's an interesting place to be. There are times when it makes me happy, right, and there are times when it's not the place I want to be.
Right.
So,
okay,
but there's clarity.
Mm-hmm.
First there's knowledge, and then there's wisdom, and then there's clarity, uh-huh. Which puts a whole new face on knowledge and wisdom. So,
okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was any detail of my experience for the month. I mean, it was a month, so mm-hmm. not a whole lot can happen. But I remember being told not to get a sunburn. Like, I can avoid that. 10 minutes and I get a sunburn. Because that's destroying government property if you are part of the military.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think anybody's ever been taken out on it. But, if you deliberately go out and get sunburned, and badly, and I used to get sunburned really badly, second-degree burns, uh-huh. because I just burn so easily. I have practically no melanin, thank you, yeah. Melanin in my skin. And I just, I have, that's sun damage.
Okay. Uh-huh.
So, and I have it on my back and shoulders and everywhere. So, I'm in the doctor a lot between the diabetes, and both my parents died of pancreatic cancer.
Okay.
So every 3 months. And now every 6 months to the dermatologist.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun. Yeah, getting old sucks.
Yes.
But I can't think of anything else. The aftermath was things died down very quickly when I got home, and I tried looking for work. And what I wanted to do, what I'd always wanted to do, was fly. And I even went looking for a job somewhere in the organization of an airline, and nothing was available. It's just because I had no skill set in that direction, no official skill set in that direction. So, I mean, aside from slinging bags, which I really didn't want to do, I was much more interested in either working as a service rep or as a flight attendant, something of that nature. Flight attendant I would have loved.
Mm-hmm.
But that was not to be.
Okay.
So so I went in the direction of theater and tried that for a long time. And
it sounds like that's the direction, like working for television and entertainment.
I did a lot of that. I got tired of looking for a job all the time, and left theater and went into publishing, and did that for about 5 years, and decided to go back to school. So I went to Queens College for early childhood and elementary education because I wanted to get my master's in special ed. Mm-hmm. And I got pulled out for a job. I was offered a job in the Bronx, managing a workshop for retarded adults, and decided to take that. And so I left school then. I thought, I can go back. And I burned out of that after about 5 years or so.
Okay.
Because they suck the life out of you. They're wonderful people.
Mm-hmm.
They're incredible people. But they're very needy emotionally. And you don't see it coming and you don't realize it. But they suck you dry.
Uh-huh.
And I had nothing left to give. So I left that and got a job at CBS. A friend of mine was deputy archivist at the broadcast center and offered me a job because I could transcribe. Offered me a job transcribing news broadcasts.
Okay.
And that's where I started. And I became an editor and a researcher for all the major network shows.
Okay.
I did that for like 13 years. And finished my education through CBS because they offered to pay half of my tuition.
Nice.
For wherever I wanted to go. And so I went to Fordham and got my bachelor's. And then went back to CBS and said, okay, I now have a degree. I'd like to become a producer. And they said, fat chance. We want you right where we've got you. Uh-huh. And I said, okay, not good enough. And I turned around and immediately got a job teaching in the public school system. Immediately. Okay. All I had to do was say, I'm available. And I had jobs thrown at me. So I took one. I thought, I need to get my feet wet. So I took one. I was teaching music to K1 and 2 out in Bell Harbor in the Rockaways.
Okay.
and it was so much fun. It was just, if this is what teaching was, I could do this forever. But I kept getting bumped by UFT members who had more seniority than me. And I finally got a job working, actually where I'm working part-time now, at a school in Corona. And taught there for several years. English.
Okay.
English, theater, journalism, and history of jazz.
Nice.
Yeah, it's cool. So it's not been a bad set of careers.
Yeah.
But I was so grateful to retire. Doing it part-time is great. But that's as much as I want to do now.
Okay.
So.
Oh.
So it's, I had a long and checkered career.
Checkered?
Yeah, I've done.
Yeah.
In order to keep myself working in theater, I had to take all kinds of things. I worked at McDonald's. I worked on an assembly line. I worked in a car wash. It goes on. When I got to New York, I was doing temp work, and I worked for Communication Workers of America as an office manager, and I worked for Jan Pierce, who became the head of the AFL-CIO, and he was at that point president of CWA, and I did a lot of accountant work, clerical. That's what they all had me earmarked for. But I could type 120 words a minute on a typewriter. So on a word processor, I was even faster. So that's how I managed to learn to transcribe, which took me 10 minutes. And I did that for a while.
Okay.
But sometimes it's not easy.
Right.
Because when you type what you hear, and what you hear is inaudible or unintelligible. It's. I started out transcribing for medical reports for doctors, who would we would not only have what they spoke into a dictaphone as a medical report, but they would back it up with a written report, and the handwriting was worse than listening to it.
Right.
So, so I got to be very good at disseminating what the hell they were saying. And by the time I got to CBS, there was no problem. I was very good at it.
Yeah, they would probably need that.
Yeah. But we transcribed, at the time I started in 87, we were transcribing all of the news reports, except, I don't know if we were doing Sunday morning or not. I don't think we were doing Sunday morning. But eventually we stopped doing it in-house, and we farmed it out to a place in New Jersey who was doing the transcribing, and then we just archived it. Things. Okay. But they had the transcripts, not because they wanted to make them available to the public, but in order to do research and find segments of tape that had aired. It was easier to look through the transcript to find what you wanted instead of looking through hours of videotape.
Right.
It just because that took forever. So, and it was easier to go from report to report or from broadcast to broadcast to find things than it was to endlessly look through tape.
Right.
And one of the things that drove me away from CBS was they added a new layer to my job of selling B-roll. I don't know, B-roll is the stuff that they shoot that they don't use. And we were selling it to places like King Features and so on who were putting together these reenactment crap things. And they needed, location stuff. And, right.
Yeah.
But they're the only ones. I mean, there were a few others, but not many. And it was really difficult making cold calls to sell videotape. Right. Who do you call? And why would they want it? Unless there's something specific. And they would come to us. If they wanted something specific. And I could tell them whether or not we had it. Because I had that stuff at hand. But I was finding old Eric Severide commentaries from the 70s that with ease because everything was organized.
Right.
And I just, they say, I want his he had a wonderful commentary on Christmas Eve in 1967, and I'd really like a copy of it. I said, okay, tell me where to send it. So, and I walked away with all of those because they were going to throw them out. I said, no, you're not. So I have them in my basement in a file. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's not mine legally, but if anybody wants it, then all they have to do is go to CBS for permission to use it.
Right.
So.
I'm sorry. I would love to talk
That's okay.
more.
No.
Thank you so much for. Is there anything that you can think of that I've forgotten to ask you?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No. I hope I've given you enough detail of what you wanted.
Yes,
I don't think
definitely.
there was nothing I felt like not wanting to tell you.
Okay, good.
So.
It's mostly just to get a big picture.
Yeah.
Of which the detail has been rich, so it's terrific.
Good.
And if there's anything that you think of, just contact me. You have my contact information.
Yeah.
And thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome. Yeah, I'm going to try and find. I know I have them somewhere, my discharge papers, but I don't remember which file they got into. I've looked 2 or 3 times. I'm going to continue to look. I have to clean all that stuff up anyway.
Okay.
And I'm sure those wouldn't be of any great value to you.
No. Actually, if scanned and sent to us, they might be terrific. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. I will continue to look for them. The big thing would be because I don't remember and I don't have it any other place than on those papers with my file number.
Okay.
And or my serial number. And if I wanted to, if come the time that they switching my general to an honorable, then I would consider doing that. But I'd need my serial number.
Right. Okay.
It would make it easier.
Okay.
They could find it, name, date of birth, and social, but
okay.
the serial number would be easier. Because I know they have copies of my stuff somewhere.
Yeah, they must.
But it's between the U.S. government and the Vatican. Good luck.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Thank you.